Ahoy! An old discussion is rearing up its head again. Yesterday I talked about items that you can upgrade to 725 gear score, items that drop at that gear score versus others that kind of just stay at whatever gear score you currently have. And one of the responses was, well, you could basically just skip the first 5 minutes of the video because all of that old gear is useless, because it was gear that didn't upgrade to 725. And I think there is a massive misunderstanding here as to where gear score matters or where it doesn't matter and how important 725 is, or if it's even best in slot in the first place. There was another discussion on Reddit today talking about how 725 is not the best for mutations, and it's not just in mutations, it's also in PvP, so let's talk about it. First of all, looking at my gear here, for example, I have 705 gear score, but if you look at the items, not everything is above 700. And if I look at people looking to get into a raid, they will often advertise their current gear score, which I think is pretty meaningless because all they need to do is roll a few of the chests at the well over in Catalyst Keys. I could just grab a Gold Coast Coconut and roll any of these, or even worse, I could just buy these crates and I could get higher than 700 gear score. The reason why this doesn't mean anything is because you could roll something like this, which has absolutely no value anywhere really, other than giving you a high gear score number. I could equip this and have higher gear score than I have now, but that's not actually making my loadout any better. And as such, we can look at, for example, these rapiers here as well. They have good perks, but this one is a PvP perk. I wouldn't replace my lower gear score rapier with that. This one has Centering Riposte, which I also don't need. Focusing on the PvE aspect a bit more first, even though this also factors in for PvP. I have an amulet at 725, so I could use this, and I use this for various situations. It comes with Unimpeded, which is a very nice new effect. It comes with health, and it comes with slash protection. So in any situation where slash damage is a problem, I will use this. If there's any boss, any raid boss, like the second raid boss, for example, in the new raid, then I will be using slash protection. But in other situations, it's just not useful. Against magical damage, it just doesn't help me. Against mutation damage, it doesn't help me. And while in PvP I could build around it and just build defenses for that elsewhere, in some places you just need maxed out protection on one particular thing. And you can see I've already typed in a prot at the top here, so I have all my amulets. And for example, here I have a strike protection amulet that has less than 700 gear score. But because it has strike protection, I am going to use it against bosses that have strike damage. I put a strike gem in it as well, and that is going to be more useful in those situations. Similarly, if I'm against a boss that has nature damage, like the last boss in the raid, I am using this amulet. Not the perfect one, but this is way, way, way better than me using my 725 amulet in a situation where nature damage is a major problem. And then, even when it comes to secondary perks, higher gear score isn't always better. For example, look at this here. This is Empty Hearth, a crafted amulet, which comes with flame protection and empowered, so it's not bad. And it also comes with Shirking Dot Cleanse, which is not very great in my opinion in most situations, unless you very specifically have a build for it. And on the other hand, I have this amulet here, which has less stats because it's 688 gear score, so it has a lower attribute total, but it comes with health, empowered, and flame protection. And if I was to go into a expedition or anything where I am taking flame damage, I would be using this lower gear score one because the overall value of these stats is better. It's not best in slot, of course, but it is going to be better, even though I lose one attribute point here, which isn't really that big of a deal. The only reason I would not necessarily always use this is if my gear score in general is too low, because if I was doing an M3, I want to be 695 gear score in order to not be reduced in damage output and increased damage taken situations, because that's the threshold for M3, specifically mutation level 3s, where you're kind of getting punished for having your gear score too low. But it's only relevant insofar that your total here needs to be higher than 695. So say I was to equip this in this setup, I would still be at 703, so it wouldn't really matter. As long as I'm mixing up a little bit and get some higher gear score pieces, that is completely fine. And usually I could even do this if other gear in my set was entirely below 725. So if everything was just 700, I could still fit this one in as well because the amulet doesn't affect gear score that much. So once again, lower gear score, better stats, more effective. And this translates over to PvP as well. First of all, in terms of the protection aspect, for example, on the Amulets, but also on further perks. Micro released a video today that is very interesting, where he talked about the actual difference that people have tested now. He found that for armor, it's roughly a 1% difference between 700 and 725 in terms of mitigation, and some other EU team found that it's a damage difference of around 3% between 700 and 725 for a weapon. So that is not really that big, and there are perks that are more important. Before I show you these, a quick reminder: if you're enjoying the video so far, consider subscribing, click the bell. If you'd like to support me further and get early trading tips, you can do so on my Patreon. With this information in mind, there are some gear pieces that are absolutely worth considering, even though they're quote-unquote only 700 gear score. Miko mentioned the example here of the Frigid Dawn set, which is farmable from Glacial Tarn this week, drops from the last boss. I think it's guaranteed on mutation level 3, otherwise you have a chance. This is gear that you can actually choose the third perk on, so you can, for example, go Enchanted Ward, Elemental Aversion, and Slash Conditioning, or Thrust Conditioning or something. Extremely strong gear that will very likely beat out any 725 gear that you could get for a very long time, unless you get completely perfect perks. But again, this is an illegal perk combo. This is damage absorb, and this is also damage absorb. So even if you have a 725 piece, it might not be better, because you just can't get this combination otherwise. And that's a very good reason to farm that this week, but also in general, just something worth knowing, that there is gear like this that has specific perks that are so strong that they kind of outclass any extra attribute points or extra armor values that you can get from the gear score. Especially the armor value really doesn't make that much of a difference compared to something like Enchanted Ward. Likewise, there's the commonly used example of the Life Ring Rapier, or learned recently it might actually be called Lifer Ring Rapier. Whichever it is, I've been trying to farm that for a while, haven't gotten it yet. It comes with Vicious and Rogue, and this is an illegal combination. We've previously seen stuff like that on some swords as well that are unfortunately outdated at this point. But this kind of stuff is also something that will stay relevant, because if you compare that, for example, to the Hoplite Rapier, which I got and I was very excited about because I got Keen as the third perk, but then it turns out that Keenly Jagged is the lock perk on it. This is a very good rapier still, don't get me wrong, especially with this passive here, with the extra base damage and everything. But in some situations, this rapier will actually be better, because you can put omnidirectional evade on this, and it'll be extremely high consistent damage, whereas here you're kind of having to take a trade-off. If you put omnidirectional evade on it, you're not getting rogue, you're not getting vicious, so you're gonna take some cuts on those crits. I don't know what would actually come out on top in terms of DPS. There would have to be a lot of testing to be done with this increase here, especially in PvE. Might be that the Hoplite Rapier can kind of offset it, but every other rapier in the game pretty much wouldn't be able to, unless you're fully crafting a 700 gear score, 725 BiS gear score rapier with Disdain Infliction, and then you roll the other two perks on it yourself, choosing all three perks. But not only is that extremely expensive, extremely out of the way for most people, it might still end up being less damage than running this at 700. The extra attribute points that you gain from 725 gear are of course nice, but at some point you're somewhat hitting diminishing returns on how much value you're getting out of it. The damage increase isn't that massive, you're not getting any extra capstones, so you're kind of starting to shuffle points into different areas anyways. You're kind of putting splits into like strength, into focus, into all that kind of stuff to get more benefits. And as such, those few points likely won't make a massive difference in most situations. Every kind of relevant gear score scaling for PvE kind of caps out at 695, and that just needs to be the total. And that's only for M3s anyways. It doesn't matter, for example, for Sandworm either. It doesn't matter for the Gorgon's Raid, as far as I'm aware. And in PvP, you are not getting much extra value out of the raw gear score either. It's more about getting it higher to get more attributes points, and seeing where you can fit in higher gear score pieces that actually have the right perks and are actually good, rather than just stuffing your set with 725 pieces basically that may not have the perks that you need at all. In the same sense, denying someone from getting into your expedition because their gear score isn't above 700 or something is just kind of showing that you don't really understand the game. The only threshold, again, 695. It used to be that sometimes purple gear was better than orange gear if you just got exactly the perks that you needed, and that is still true to some extent. You have some items that have two good perks that are better than a bad 3-perker. But generally speaking, nowadays you can usually get 3 good perks on your armor pieces, on your jewelry, so that is relatively rare, because you can almost always have some kind of conditioning on your armor along with refreshing or freedom in PvE versus PvP, and then some other useful third perk. So you're seeing less of the purple variants, but still very much things where a specific perk is why an item is chosen. This, for example, here, this light piece is technically more of a 2-perker, if even that, because shirking fortification doesn't really matter much to me in light here. It's only there because I have Leeching Flurry on this. That's why I'm using it, and health is a nice bonus, but it's also not the highest priority either. So, in a sense, look at this as a purple item that is better than just wearing a higher gear score legendary. I hope this clears things up a little bit and makes you understand gearing a little bit better. If it did, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. I'll talk more about how you get gear and what's the endgame loop in general in the next days, if you're interested in that. And also, if you'd like to support me further and get early training tips in return, you can do so on my Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who I do exactly that. And thank you for watching. SLOTH, out.